third graders. We're anxious to share a new lesson with you today. Today we're actually going to start reading our A to Z mystery. So right off the bat, I'm going to read Chapter 1 to you. Chapter 1 of The Absent Author. Please, Josh, Dink said. If you come with me today, I'll owe you one. Just name it, anything. Dink's full name was Donald David Duncan, but no one in Greenlawn ever called him that, except his mother when she meant business. Josh Pinto grinned at his best friend. Anything? He raised his mischievous green eyes toward the ceiling of Dink's bedroom. Let's see, what do you have that I want? He scratched his head. I know, I'll take Loretta. Dink tossed a pillow at Josh. When I said anything, I meant anything but my guinea pig. Are you coming with me or not? I have to be at the book nook in 15 minutes. Dink rushed to the bathroom, tucked his shirt into his jeans. At the same time, Josh followed him. Standing in front of the mirror, Dink yanked a brush through his thick blonde hair. Well, he asked, are you coming with me? What's so important about this writer guy? Josh asked, sitting on the edge of the bathtub. Dink turned around and pointed his hairbrush. Wallace isn't just some writer guy, Josh. He's the most famous mystery writer in the world. All kids read his books, except for you. If he's so famous, why is he coming to dinky little Greenlawn? Dink charged back into his bedroom. I told you, he's coming because I invited him. I'm scared to death to meet someone so famous. I don't even know what you're supposed to say to an author. Dink dived under his bed and backed out again with his sneakers. Please come with me. Josh leaned in the bedroom doorway. Sure, I'll come, you dope. I'm just trying to make you sweat. Usually you're so calm. Dink stared at his friend. You will? Thanks, I can't believe Wallace is really coming. When I wrote and asked him, I never thought he'd say yes. Dink yanked his backpack out of his closet. Pack my books, okay? I'm getting Wallace to sign them all. Josh began pulling Wallace books off Dink's bookshelf. Geez, how many do you have? Everyone he's ever written. Dink sat on the floor to tie his sneakers. 23 so far. You should read some of them, Josh. Josh picked out The Poisoned Pond, and he read the back cover. Hey, cool, it says here that Wallace lives in a castle in Maine. Wouldn't that be neat? Dink grinned. When I'm a famous writer, you can live in my castle, Josh. No way, when I'm a famous artist, you can live in my castle down in the basement. Josh picked up The Riddle in the River book. What's this guy like, he asked. How come his picture isn't on any of these books? I wondered about that too, Dink said. I sent him one of my school pictures and asked for a picture of him. But when I got his letter, there was no picture. Dink finished tying his laces. Maybe Wallace just doesn't like having his picture taken. Josh squeezed all 23 books into Dink's backpack. He grinned at Dink. Or maybe he's just ugly. Dink laughed. Gee, Josh, you're ugly and you love having your picture taken. Ha ha. Josh picked up his drawing pad. But just because you're my best friend, I'll draw his picture at the bookstore. Dink looked at his watch. Yikes, he said. We have to pick up Ruth Rose in 1 minute. He tore into the bathroom and started brushing his teeth. How'd you get her to come? Josh asked. Dink rushed back into his room, wiping the toothpaste from his mouth. Are you kidding? Ruth Rose loves Wallace books. Dink slung his backpack over his shoulder. He and Josh hurried next door to 24 Woody Street. Tiger, Ruth Rose's orange cat, was sitting in the sun on the steps. Dink pressed the doorbell. Ruth Rose showed up at the door. As usual, she was dressed all in one color. Today it was purple. She wore purple overalls and a purple shirt, and she had on purple running shoes. A purple baseball cap kept her black curls out of her face. Hey, she said. Then she turned around and screamed into the house. The guys are here, Mom. I'm leaving. Dink and Josh covered their ears. Geez, Ruth Rose, Josh said. I don't know what's louder, your outfit or your voice. Ruth Rose smiled sweetly at Josh. I can't wait until Wallace signs my book, she said. She held up a copy of The Phantom in the Pharmacy. I wonder if Wallace will read the new book he's working on, Dink said. Well, what's the title? Ruth Rose asked. They headed toward the book nook. I don't know, said Dink, but he wrote in this letter that he's doing some research while he's here in Connecticut. Dink pulled a letter out of his pocket and he read it out loud while they walked. Dear Mr. Duncan, thank you for your kind letter. I'm so impressed that you've read all my books. I have good news. I've made arrangements to come to the Book Nook to sign books. I can use part of my time for research. Thanks for your picture. I'm so happy to finally meet one of my most loyal fans. Short of being kidnapped, nothing will stop me from coming. See you soon, Wallace Wallace. The letter was signed Wallace Wallace in big loopy letters. Dink grinned. Pretty neat, huh? Pretty neat, Mr. Duncan, teased Josh. You should have that letter framed, Ruth Rose said. Great idea, Dink said. They passed Howard's barber shop. Howard waved through his window as they hurried by. Come on, Dink urged as he dragged his friends down the street to the Book Nook. They looked through the window out of breath. The bookstore was crowded with kids. The Book Nook's owner, Mr. Paskey, had set up folding chairs. Dink noticed that most of them were already taken. Dink saw Mr. Paskey sitting behind a table. A big white sign on the table said, Welcome, Wallace Wallace. But the chair behind the sign was empty. Dink gulped and stared at the empty seat. Where was Wallace Wallace? That's the end of chapter 1, and we're going to pause right there before we start chapter 2. Yesterday, we got you started with thinking, before you even started reading the book, you started thinking about what is the mystery going to be here and who might the crime solver to be. Today, when I read chapter 2, I'm going to model for you how, when people are reading mysteries, they really pay attention to clues. This kind of reminds me as you're reading, when we were reading Stone Fox, sometimes our brains were turned in and just enjoying the story and learning about the characters, and other times our brain turned into kind of a learning mode when we learned about a potato farm and we learned about all the techniques for farming to help us appreciate that book a little bit more. So this is going to be how we turn our brain on and off to different clues as we read. So let's dive into chapter 2, really thinking about clues as we read them. Dink raced into the Book Nook. Josh and Ruth Rose were right behind him. They found 3 seats behind Tommy Tomko and Eddie Carini. Those are 2 new people we're hearing about. I wonder if they're suspects. Dink plopped his pack on the floor. The clock over the cash register said 3 minutes after 11. Where is he? Dink whispered to Tommy Tomko. Tommy turned around. Beats me. He's not here yet, and Mr. Paskey looks worried. Wonder why Mr. Paskey looks so worried. What's going on? Ruth Rose said. Dink told her and Josh what Tommy had said. Paskey does look pretty nervous, Josh whispered. Mr. Paskey always looks nervous, Dink whispered back, looking around the room. He saw about 30 kids and that he knew. Mrs. Davis, Dink's neighbor, was looking at gardening books. Dink checked out the other grown-ups in the store. None of them looked like the famous mystery writer. Right there when I read that part about Mr. Paskey being nervous, it kind of made me suspicious because I know sometimes when people are really nervous, it's because they're trying to hide something or they're afraid that they're going to get caught about something. So I'm going to actually take a Post-it note and I'm going to put it right on that part that talks about how Mr. Paskey's looking really nervous, so I can come back to that later if I need to. That seems like a clue to me. Mr. Paskey stood up. Boys and girls, welcome to the Book Nook. Wallace Wallace should be here any second. How many of you have copies that you want to be autographed? Everyone waved books in the air. Oh, wonderful. I'm sure Wallace Wallace will be happy to know that Green Lawn is a reading town. The kids clapped and cheered. Dink glanced at the clock. 11? He swallowed, trying to stay calm. Wallace Wallace was late, but it was only 5 minutes. Slowly, 5 more minutes passed. Dink felt his palms getting damp. Where is Wallace Wallace, he wondered. Some of the kids started getting restless, and Dink heard one kid say, Whenever I'm late, I get grounded. Where is he? Josh asked. Ruth Rose looked at her watch. It's only 10 after, she said. Famous people are always late. Now Dink stared at the clock. The big hen jerked forward again, paused, then wobbled forward again. At 11:15, Mr. Paskey stood up again. I don't understand why Wallace Wallace is so late, he said. Dink noticed that his bald head was shiny with sweat. His bow tie was getting a workout, so he must have been adjusting his bow tie a lot. Those seem like clues too. I'm going to put another post-it right there. Mr. Paskey smiled bravely, but his eyes were blinking like crazy through his thick glasses. Should we give him a few more minutes? The crowd grumbled, but nobody wanted to go anywhere. Ruth Rose started to read her book. Josh opened his sketch pad and began drawing Mr. Paskey. Dink turned and stared at the door. He mentally ordered Wallace to walk through the door. You just have to come, thought Dink. Ever since he had received Wallace's letter, he'd thought about only one thing, meeting him today. Suddenly, Dink felt his heart skip a beat. The letter said, short of being kidnapped, nothing will stop me from coming. Kidnapped? Dink shook himself. Of course Wallace hadn't been kidnapped. Mr. Paskey stood up again, but this time he wasn't smiling. I'm sorry, kids, he said, but Wallace doesn't seem to be coming after all. The kids groaned. They got up, scraping chairs and bumping knees. Mr. Paskey apologized to them as they crowded past, heading for the door. I've read every single one of his books, Dink heard Amy Flower telling another girl. Now I'll probably never meet anyone famous. I can't believe we gave up a soccer game for this, Tommy Tomko muttered to Eddie Carini on their way out. Ruth Rose and Josh went next, but Dink remained in his seat. He was too stunned to move. He felt the letter through his jeans, short of being kidnapped. Finally, Dink got up and walked out. Josh and Ruth Rose were waiting for him. What's the matter? Ruth Rose said. You look sick. I am sick, Dink mumbled. I invited him here, and now this is all my fault. What's your fault? Josh asked. This, he said, thrusting the letter into Josh's hands. I think Wallace has been kidnapped. I'm going to stop right there. So were you paying attention to clues as you read? As you heard, as I was reading, you probably saw me paying attention to clues, and I was putting post-it notes in where I saw something that I wanted to remember, that I wanted to be able to go back to. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to teach you some strategies for thinking and talking about mysteries. These are some sentence stems that you might use when you're typing to us about your reading today, or maybe talking to someone at home, or jotting down notes in your reader's notebook. These are some sentence stems that help us. It kind of reminds me of growing an idea. You might say, when you meet a clue in a book, you might say something like, this seems weird because, or you might say, I wonder why. You might say, this makes me think that. Maybe this could mean, I think this fits in with the big mystery because, and you can add your evidence behind there. Inside of your reader's notebook, if you look at session 2, the first page kind of looks like this. We don't really need that page, but if you turn to the next page, you'll see, I'm going to get a little closer, you'll see that all of those sentence stems are right here that you might use when you write to us today about what you're thinking about clues as you're reading your own mystery book. I want to model for you what I wrote, and I wrote it with a big marker in my response log so you can kind of see it. So on this page, I used some of those sentence stems, and I wrote the title of my book on top. And then I wrote down one of the clues that I saw when I was reading. I wrote, Mr. Paskey is acting nervous. Then I used some sentence stems down here to tell more. I wrote, this makes me think he is trying to hide something. Sometimes people get nervous when they think they might get caught. That is what we're going to ask you to write today. So, as soon as this video is over, you can get your mystery book. Read the first chapter or two. If your book doesn't have chapters, just maybe read the first chunk, the first little section, find a good stopping point, and then on your reading Google Doc, put today's date, and then write to us a little bit about a clue that you found. So you'll write a little bit about a clue just like I did in here. Remember, you can always go back to this video and rewind it a little bit or pause it to refresh your memory on what we wrote. So you'll have a response like this that maybe you wrote with your pencil in your response log, and then you're going to go and type that on your Google Doc. We can't wait to read some of the clues you encounter as you read the first chapter or two in your mystery book. Happy reading!